I wanted to create a place where the trials and tribulations of life become transformative testimonies. A place where everyday individuals from all walks of life courageously open up about the challenges that have passed and the challenges that will last. A place to celebrate the beauty of faith, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound impact of sharing our journeys with one another. I'm Heather Patterson. Welcome to Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Welcome to Blood, Sweat, and Tears podcast. I am so excited to welcome to our very first episode, Amanda Elliot. And Amanda is somebody who I have never personally met, but I feel like I've known forever. She's the sister of a very sweet, precious, dear friend of mine. And I've actually prayed for Amanda for many, many, many years, but we've never spoken. So thank you so much for being willing to come forth and share your testimony. And that's one thing I knew when God laid you on my heart, that you have the same belief of sharing your testimony to brag on Jesus. And so I'm just thrilled and thankful again that you're here today to share your story with me and just with the rest of the world, and to give hope where it's so needed.
Right. I'm excited and very, very honored. And I know that the Lord gives each of us stories and He gives us opportunities to tell them. And I believe that what He gives us is very rarely intended only for us.
Amen. Yes. I love that. I've heard you just in a couple of one of your specific trials that I'm sure you're going to share about today. You would get on Facebook often and you would just speak about how the Lord met you in that day. And so I just have so much confidence, and I love the way that you speak and that the Lord speaks through you, that the Spirit does. So, tell us, let's just hear the things that you've journeyed through and the way that God has just shown up and carried you through those trials and tribulations.
Well, this morning I was thinking about, how do you tell a testimony? I'm 44 years old. And so I think growing up, I thought that people's testimonies were like a movie where there's like this one really climactic or really like huge challenge mountain they go through. And it's like you work towards that and then you go back down. And real life does not work that way. I've
Don't we
realized.
wish it did?
I wish it did.
Done with that one.
Done with that one, and then I never have to do it again. And I do believe that once we experience breakthrough in certain areas, that we don't live in this constant state of
Oh, are you there? It's frozen.
dysfunction or challenge of the same sort over and over again. I believe the Lord gives us breakthrough to move through those things. But then there are, I think, new mountains and new things to face. And we all have a completely different journey. And some people may have one mountain, and some people may have 52 mountains, and some people may have no mountains. But this morning I was thinking about when the journey for me began with the Lord, and that I accepted salvation when I was in elementary school. This very small little, I remember her she seemed tiny to me, little kind of older woman. She had her Bible and she had been a missionary for years. And she came to Briarcrest Baptist and presented salvation to us. And that was the day that I got saved. And so I presumed, I grew up, in a Christian household, that I would look at people who had been through like things that I considered really big, and that seemed so foreign to me.
Yeah.
And I'd never imagined that I would go through things that I would stand up in front of people and say, this was really difficult, but the Lord brought me through it. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Like I said, I was raised in a Christian home, and I went to college, and I just like fell off the wagon, and then it like ran over me a few times.
Same here. I was on. I fell off with you.
I was like, I shouldn't do that. And then I would do it anyway. And so it was probably like almost a 10-year period of me like being in what I would consider a true, like kind of disobedient life. You
Mhm.
call it whatever you want, but in retrospect, I realize now, like, I was not obeying the Lord. I
Yeah,
was not doing His will,
I tell my
you know?
kids, I'm like, you're acting like the menace to society, not like what Jesus tells you to do, right?"
I was not doing what Jesus told me to do. Um, I think a lot of times, through those periods of time, I was like, I know the truth. And I never doubted the truth. I never doubted that Jesus saved me. I never doubted that God was sovereign and loving. I mean, I went through periods of time of a little bit of confusion, but I never really, I would say, lost my faith. I was just living out of my own viewpoint of the world, my own flesh, my own desires, things like that. And even once I kind of started to go back to like a church, more church lifestyle, I think that was when I started to realize suddenly I had stopped doing all of the what I would call like overtly bad things you shouldn't do. And part of that was just because I kind of grew up and got older.
Right.
And I started to think, well, following Jesus can't be just like, I'm just going to do not bad stuff. Because if that's the case, people who are just kind of by nature boring people would be Christ followers. So I'm
Uh-huh,
like,
uh-huh.
I'm missing something here. I'm not really understanding um or rightly seeing. And so much of what the world says and what my flesh was saying as well led me to not rightly seeing the world, not rightly seeing myself, not rightly seeing God. And it took I mean, I would say I'm still in process. I think all of us are
Oh,
still in
yeah.
process of
Till the
constantly
day we're
saying,
pushing up daisies for sure.
right. Every day. Okay, Lord, what is just something I made up in my head? What's something that's kind of infiltrated from just living in a fallen world? And what is truly your voice? What is truly your way of doing things?
Like the discernment.
The discernment.
Yeah.
So, having discernment, um, when I was younger, I would have a sense that I would know something, and sometimes I would think that that was kind of crazy, and I realize now I look back that that was the Spirit prompting me when I
Love that.
was
Like
much,
when you were
much
young,
younger.
when you were little.
Right, and not really understanding how you move forward with discernment and things like that. Um, I moved away and I was gone for like 12 years from Arkansas, where we're from. And during that period of time, when I was away from friends that I'd had for a long time, when I was away from family, it was a lot of me and the Lord by ourselves. It felt like when I went through different experiences, I went through like a health challenge that brought me to the Lord in a brand new way. It was probably the first time since I had been walking through the wilderness where I really feel like I started to rightly see how I was supposed to walk as an actual follower of Jesus. And I will never forget, I called it the mystery illness, and I still never figured out what it was. It was just kind of an assortment of symptoms that, praise God, I no longer have. But it was really difficult because I was young and healthy and presumed that if you got sick, you went to the doctor and they gave you medicine and then you were well.
Uh-huh,
And then I moved on with my life.
uh-huh.
But I would have all these tests done and continue to have symptoms and things like that and become very kind of frustrated and angry through that process, and was also growing close to the Lord at the same time. And I'll never forget having this impression one day. I was really close friends with a non-believer and understanding for the first time the Lord saying that how you do this will tell this person who Jesus really is. And the
No
concept,
pressure.
no pressure, like the concept of suffering, and that seems like a dramatic term, but in my world, I was suffering because
Mhm.
I was physically unhealthy. I couldn't just run around and go do whatever I wanted and eat whatever I wanted anymore. I had like a lot of stomach issues. It's kind of like having like a stomach virus that just was never going to go away. It's what it felt
Uh-uh.
like. And so, like I said, it wasn't to call it suffering seems in retrospect a bit dramatic, but for me, it was suffering and it was painful and it was challenging. And the idea that I should do that without complaint or anger or frustration or resentment at that present reality was very radical to me.
It was blasphemy, right? I'm
It
sure.
was, 'cause it
Yeah.
was like the gospel of Amanda up until that point. It was like, "Well, that's not fair." Well,
Yeah. Never will be. Yeah.
never will be, and I realized too, I'm like, praise God that he isn't fair, because if he was, I would most certainly not be sitting here and, like, speaking with any sort of, like, articulation. I would
Right.
be probably in a ditch, or I would have not recovered. I made some choices over the years that could have led to permanent consequences. And I believe only by the grace of God and the prayers of my mother and my grandmother, and my sister, who figured things out before I figured them out. Um, I believe without those prayers and just God being really merciful and really gracious when I did not deserve it, that I would have had permanent consequences for foolish decisions I made when I was younger. And I don't. And I am eternally grateful for
That
that.
even that you can look back and see his hand over you at such a young age, though you didn't realize it then.
Right.
I mean, just the fact, like you said, of pulling you through that,
Right.
that was his hand. And when you mentioned the prayers of your mom and your sister, I mean, that made me so emotional.
Oh.
Just to being on their end of just caring and praying for someone they loved so much. And then
Mhm.
they're in the waiting, right? They're in the waiting
Right.
to see that, and
Right.
just that emotional, just to see that, I guess, for lack of a better, just that spiritual warfare
Mhm.
actually taking place. And
Right.
that's, I'm glad you made that point, just shared that.
And that
Makes
was
me
the
emotional.
first time that I began to understand spiritual warfare. I mean, I grew up in a background where I believed in miracles. I knew that they could happen. I had never actually seen someone like pray over someone, like lay their hands on them, like where it says in the word to like bring them to the elders or anoint them with oil or lay hands on them. I had never actually seen any of that. I'd read it in the Bible, and I prayed a lot, and I prayed a lot really privately. And we prayed. I mean, I have pictures of me when I was 2 or 3 years old, at the side of the bed praying. I knew my mom prayed. I could hear my mom praying. We prayed over meals, and we prayed together. But it was just I don't say the church culture, but it was just a different viewpoint of spiritual warfare. And I've
Mhm.
gone from, like, I think one extreme kind of to the other, and landed somewhere in, like, that God is mysterious and he leads each of us to war spiritually in different ways, and also different ways in different seasons and things like that. And that was the first time through that kind of sickness where I started to have some kind of concept of how spiritual warfare worked, and I still didn't understand my role really in any of that. Um, but it did bring me to this place of obedience that I had lacked, really, really lacked up until that point. I thought that I could both live how I wanted to and say that I believed in God. And it's like, I often say that I can read a book about health and working out, and I can believe it. I mean, I have them. I've read them. I'm like, I believe 100% that this is true. I know without beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I follow this book, if I eat how they say,
If
if
I don't
I
have the
exercise,
carbs for the rest of my life,
yeah,
yeah.
right. Like, I know that it works. I don't have even a little bit of a doubt that it works. But if I don't do it, then I haven't done
You have
it.
no
And he
result.
gave me that revelation. I'm like, I can know all these things in the Bible. Like, I can know that I know them. But if I don't actually participate, I don't do anything, it's just knowledge. It's
Gosh, I
not,
love
I'm not
that.
actually following Jesus. It's just I'm just believing something kind of more intellectually. And so through that period of time, was the first time he ever called me to pray out loud over somebody. And it was the most like intimidating, overwhelming. I was in a hospital with a friend who was really kind of like seeking the Lord and didn't really know. And she didn't have anyone around her that she was very close to that was a believer. And she had a brand new, tiny, tiny baby in the NICU. And we're standing there looking at him in the little bassinet clear thing. And there are all these nurses and all of the tubes and all of the things.
Such a
And the Lord's
fragile
like,
situation.
fragile situation. And I don't want to offend anybody or do anything I shouldn't do. And the Lord clearly is like, pray over that baby. And of course I'm like, well, I've been praying. Like, I'm going to go home. I'll lay on my face at home and I'll like cry and praise the Lord. I'll do whatever. But like, it's like, no, like pray over that baby right now. Like right now, pray over this baby. And I'm like, I thought I was going to throw up. I mean, I broke out into a sweat. It was just so over dramatized in my mind. I thought, oh my gosh, this is just really kind of radical. Like,
Your
this is
friends
kind of
thinking
like,
that you need to be admitted to ICU at this point
right.
because
Like,
you're
she's going to think I'm crazy. And all these nurses are going to think I'm crazy. I'm like, what if I pass out? And I kept thinking, well, I'm in a hospital. If I pass out, those nurses will know what to do. They'll like resuscitate me. It'll be fine. But I was like, can I pray over your baby? And she's like, please pray for my baby. And I knew right before that, once again, no pressure, but the Lord's like, if you don't pray for this baby, no one else is coming to pray for that baby.
I have chill bumps
And
all
it was
over.
like, okay, like that's what it took for me. And I know everybody's different. And I'm sure some people are just like, I feel like I should pray for that person. I'll pray for them. It's no big deal out loud. But for me, in the background I'd grown up in, the environment, and just my personality and things like that, it seemed really extreme to me.
Sure.
And I look back now and I mean, I don't say I'll pray over anyone anywhere, but I will pretty much pray over anybody anywhere at this point. Like
I love
unfazed.
it.
Like if I'm in Walmart and somebody's like, I'm sorry, will you pray over me? I'm like, I'll pray for you
You're like,
right
"I
now.
got you,
Lord,
boo,
I don't care.
yeah."
I mean, weirder things happen at Walmart for sure than me praying.
They do. I
But
know that's right.
that was a big change, a big shift in how I approached the Lord, how I approached spirituality, how I looked at everything, realizing all of these, moments, the Lord impressing on me one time, if everyone participated at the level you participate in at church, what would it look like? And I
Wow.
was like,
Wow.
bad, not good.
It'd be shut down.
Be shut down. Be just like a few people here or there, like nobody teaching anything.
Random dance party on the right. It's fine. Yeah.
Right. It's those moments that I look back over and the Lord is, he's not harsh, but he is firm, but so kind. And I know that he both meets us where we are, but he also has this expectation, I believe, when we see ourselves as he sees us and we start to see what it is he wants out of our lives. Because our life is like just on this earth is it's a minuscule fraction of our existence. It's such a small fraction of our existence that it's like hard to even put a number that small on it.
Uh-huh.
And that was the other thing that I began to really hold on to through and have held on to and continue to through everything that seems like, well, this is kind of impossible or this is really pretty difficult. I don't know how we're going to do this. During that period of time too, in like my late 20s, I really started to, he started to give me a eternal viewpoint. And I lose it at times. Like I lose my mind and I lose
Yeah,
my eternal
sure.
viewpoint.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
one comes for sure before the other. But it brings me back to that over and over again, that if you can be obedient, like for just this fraction of time, which feels like forever for us, but it's such a fraction of time, then we have eternity. Like I have eternity. I have
Mhm.
infinity years where I can do not any of this.
Right.
So if I can do this well, if I can glorify him and be obedient when it is difficult, then my eternity will look different, and other people's eternity will look different,
Mhm.
and my children's eternity will look different based on whether or not I am willing to just obey, and even when the stakes are high, to obey,
Mhm.
which is,
Right.
you know, I I think it's easy with the culture that we live in to feel like church or your relationship with the Lord is like a bonus track. It's like something extra. It's an additional thing that you do in life. And that's how I operated off and on for years. And getting to a point where you're like, it is life.
It is
It
life.
is
Yeah.
my it is my
Uh-huh.
whole life. That's how when Paul says to pray without ceasing and you're young and you think, I am not praying all day every day. That I am not praying all the time. Like, I mean, that seems kind of crazy when you're young. When I was young anyway, that seemed kind of like, well, there's a time that you pray and then there's a time to like, you know, do your
Well,
life and
I am, and it'll even be while I'm, just walk in and see a sink full of dishes, wondering why nobody's touched them yet. And like I'm going, God, can you just help me get through this moment? Even down to just situations like that, from the big situations to the lower situations.
right.
I find myself praying without, I mean,
Yes.
everything, just
Yes.
to try to be who he is wanting me to be, instead of
Right.
losing my biscuits or at certain situations or, um, when I'm down on my knees and I've prayed and I haven't seen an answer yet. And, I'm
Right.
just losing my mind to that kind of situation. Um, no, it is. I mean, I'm always like, hey God, it's me again. It's Margaret.
It's me
I'm
again.
back.
Mhm.
I know we just talked 5 seconds ago, but I'm back,
Right.
but there's so much once you find that relationship with him and once you have reached a point of knowing that he is life,
Right.
that's who you want to go to all the time,
Right. It
you know?
becomes second nature. It
Yeah.
becomes like there are the people who, when they call, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're like, I'll shut everything down. I've got to talk to them. I got to get my AirPod in. I got to talk to them. Even if you talk to them all the time. And then there's people that you're like, oh,
Uh-huh.
yeah, oh, I'll call you back.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? And at some point, it's like, I feel like the Lord becomes that person that you're like, it's just me and you all the time.
Mhm.
Like, can't wait to hear what you have to say. And it isn't that way all day, every day,
Right.
um, because I think we all go through these periods of time where we feel, frustration or we feel disappointment or we feel confusion or we just get overly busy, even with good things. And that was the other thing the Lord showed me once I really came back to Him and stopped, I always say stop doing the bad stuff, was then the enemy is the author of distraction. He's the author of destruction. And I see him so clearly in the big things. But, it's like the little foxes that spoil the vine.
Mhm.
It's the dishes, it's the dirty socks. It's
Mhm.
as a mother, like, you didn't tell me about the project due tomorrow, or, I'm about to run out of gas and I'm 10 minutes late to pick up my kid. I mean, just all of these things that don't seem like a big deal, but and even the good things, they all pile up and take time because God is infinite, but we are finite. I am like only one human being with only so many hours in a day and so many brain cells in my brain, and my bandwidth is only what it is. And the enemy is definitely, I think, the author of distraction for
Oh, without a
those who
doubt.
are really trying to pursue him. He will do anything, even if it's little petty things, to get us in a place where we are just forget to pray, where
Mhm.
we don't feel like we're in a place of direct disobedience, but we're also not living in the absolute like fullness
You're just
of what
busy.
he
Yeah.
has.
You're
We're
just
just busy,
busy. Uh-huh.
just busy. And I'm like, it's okay to be busy at times, but I do know that there are times I have to stop and go, okay, if I don't have time for this thing that I know clearly the Lord wants me to do, if I don't have time for that, let me look and see what am I doing that
Mhm.
maybe He didn't tell me to do.
Right.
It isn't a bad
Am
thing,
I
but it just
scrolling? Am I just sitting here scrolling through
right.
Instagram or yeah, or am I trying to find a new Netflix series or am I do the clothes have to be ironed right now? I mean,
Right.
it's just when you make him that priority, the clothes will eventually they'll always be there,
Yeah.
but I think that was probably a bad example. But no, I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah, like what am
Right.
I filling my time with that
Right.
basically isn't even necessary?
Yes. And that period of time, that's like I came out of that and was really felt like I was in a place of walking with the Lord. And then I went through, I had a 2-year-old son at the time and lived 6 hours away from my family and went through a really painful divorce that I did not expect to happen. And the Lord absolutely led me through it, carried me through it. He did things that just absolutely just blew my mind. And he was so incredibly faithful that that was really up till that point I was like, no, I really am. And then when it really was like this is going to determine whether or not I like have a place to live, whether or not I'm able to be the sort of mother that I know you've called me to be and not be just this, emotionally unhealthy, dysfunctional kind of person. And at that point, I was really involved in our church and I was a Sunday school teacher for little girls. And the Lord had again led me to do that. That wasn't something that I was like, I can't wait to do this.
Right.
Someone asked me to help out in VBS, and I was like,
You're like, I am,
I
yeah.
have a job. Like, I
You weren't
work.
like, no, I'm living to work in VBS.
I'm like,
Yes.
what? And then I went and I was like, well, this is really awesome. And then I kept teaching VBS. It was only for 1 week. And then the children's minister's like, you should teach Sunday school. And I was like, oh, like every week.
Slow your
Um,
roll.
every single week? Like, committed? Like, be committed to do that every single week, you know? But that held me to a level of accountability with,
Mhm.
like, spiritual accountability and to a standard that I would have never held myself to. And so going through the divorce, I was like, I can't not show up for these girls. I can't not show up for church. They became so important, so precious to me.
Because you went
And
I mean, it was like you said, it was unexpected, and then you were just all of a sudden, you're like, "Oh my word, I'm now I'm gonna be a single mom. Where are we gonna
right,
live?" Like, like all the things that you're trying to figure out while you're grieving, what you didn't see coming, and
right.
then you're still having to show up for this responsibility. At a time,
Yes,
did it ever seem like, "God, I really just have too much to do to show up for Sunday school and teach." Like, I'm so exhausted emotionally and
right. Yes and no, because it was so emotionally fulfilling. And that
okay.
may sound selfish,
Yeah.
but there was an element of that experience that was so emotionally fulfilling because the girls in my class were they were just so precious. I mean, they were just so full of life. They were fifth and sixth graders. And I would always say, I did want to teach that grade. Like when it came to them saying, you should, teach or whatever, I said, that's the grade I want to teach. And they're like, that's the grade? That's like, nobody wants to teach that grade. Like half of them are little girls and half of them are women. And I distinctly remember that age. And I remember it being a really important period of time for myself. And I think for a lot of girls too, when you go through that stage from like playing with dolls to noticing boys. And you may
Mhm.
be like in the same place almost at the same time. And you're like, I don't know what I want. And you start to realize at that point, like things about, what it means to really live in the flesh, so to
Yeah.
speak, I think at that age. And especially for our children, but even for us, even for me, like in the early 90s, um, that was a period of time where being cool became really important. And so once that becomes your focus, then it's really easy to ignore the faith that you've grown up in. Even if your
Right.
parents are taking you to church every Sunday, you go to school and you're like, being cool is really important to me. And in
Yeah.
most social settings, being cool means living in overt sin and bragging about it,
Mhm.
generally speaking. Not
Right.
always, but
Right.
very often. That's like the hallmark of being cool. And so I did want to teach that age because I knew I'm in my early 30s. At the time, I was an editor at a magazine doing like fashion and things like that. And so the girls, they like to talk about clothes and they like to talk about fashion. And the idea that I worked at a magazine was very like interesting to them. And so I wanted to show them a lot of things that I didn't know or understand when I was younger
Mm-hmm.
about how powerful their prayers were and about who God really says that they are and about how radically different their life can be if they see themselves as God sees them and then behave that way. Like not
And
just
I'm
believe,
sure
like
too, even as you
behave
were
that way.
like speaking into them at some point, you were probably reminding yourself
Yes.
of the
Yes.
same. Were
Yes.
you?
Yes, absolutely. It was
Yeah.
like the lessons were for me
Uh-huh.
as
Wow.
well.
Yeah.
And I would be, I didn't pick the lessons. It was like, a pre-done curriculum. And so often I'm looking at the curriculum and it was like, that was the lesson that I needed to
Mhm.
marinate on. And because I knew I was going to be in front of them at this, like, to me, really crucial, pivotal age in their life, I couldn't slack off. I couldn't be like, yeah, well, I'm just going to kind of like
Yeah.
just not really give it my all,
You had
who
to
really
show up.
cares? So it forced me, like, I looked back and I was really thankful that there was this level of accountability. And with my son, he was 2 years old. So there's a level of accountability there of like showing up for him, but you can hide from a 2-year-old.
Mhm. No, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you can fake it till you make it a lot of times with a 2-year-old. And so the Lord, I know, put these outward kind of standards in place that would be right there in my face that would force me to show up when I wanted to not
When you
show
wanted to
up.
crawl in a hole.
I wanted to crawl in a hole. And he did the same thing again. Years later, we ended up, blessedly, I got married again. And the Lord, like, miraculously, literally, like, brought me a husband. His name's Scott. And I knew him from high school. And we didn't have like a close relationship in high school or anything like that. And we found each other. He found me on Facebook, of course, of all places. And we reconnected that way. Years later, we probably hadn't spoken in like 18, 20 years or something like that. And I mean, just our relationship was another miracle
Mhm.
that God gave me was him. I mean, he was like this living, breathing. I used to say he is a living, breathing, walking human answer to a prayer, like
Wow.
100%. I wasn't like on my face every day, like, Lord, I'm so lonely. Bring me a husband. God, I need a man. I was not in that place in my life at all. But I was in a place where I had said, Lord, I know I'll get married again someday. I'm sure I will. Um, but if and when I do, these are the things that matter to me. And I do not want to go on dates. I do not enjoy dating. It feels like a job interview with like more makeup. I just don't.
Mhm.
Some people like it. I didn't ever like it. I didn't ever enjoy going on a bunch of dates. And so people would say, are you going to date now? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to date now. I don't want
Nope.
to date.
Nope. Not
And
dating ever.
and they would say, well, how are you going to like meet somebody? And I'm like God's just going to bring you someone. And I'm like, listen, I used to say all the time, if God can, we believe he literally parted the Red Sea and millions of people walked across. That wasn't figurative. That absolutely literally happened. And we believe that
Mhm.
beyond a shadow of a doubt that happened. I trust the same God who did that can bring this one man, just one man who is the desire of my heart. That is it. I don't need to date 15 people. I just need the one man who is the desire, who meets the desires of my heart that I've told the Lord. And he did. I mean, he would tell me something about himself, and I'm like, check, check.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to Amanda's journey thus far. And guess what? Her testimony isn't over yet. Tune in next time as Amanda shares a truly unimaginable trial while continuing to shed light, wisdom, and encouragement through it all. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks so much for listening. I'd love for you to join me on Instagram and YouTube at BSNT Podcast. That's B as in blood, S as in sweat, AND, T as in tears podcast. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode reminding you that the battle has already been won.